Hey, we need to take this one step at a time. You can't explain everything in just one sentence. So, here we go. Why do we want to paint these farmers' shoes, like Van Gogh, or create a piece of music? What's the deal? It's all about existence, about its unveiling. It's not just about the practical relationship between what exists and us. So, this is like super basic, like really, really basic. How do we even start this discussion? Let's kick things off by talking about a question. When we look at things outside of ourselves, we start to understand what they really mean. Let's keep it simple. Imagine we're in an English class right now, and I'm the teacher in a kindergarten, teaching English to little kids. Today, I'm going to teach you two words, man and woman. I thought of using pictures to help you remember, so I brought two drawings. One shows a soldier, with a man written below, and the other shows a nurse, with woman written below. I put these drawings on the board and asked you all to learn together. So, today we're learning these two words, man and woman. I'll just point to the soldier and say, this is a man. Then I'll point to the nurse and say, this is a woman. Let's all say it together. Suddenly, a student raised her hand and asked, are you saying that all men in the world are soldiers? And all women are nurses? If a kid asked me this, I'd be speechless for a moment and not know how to answer. But we can't believe that anyone would ask that. Why? Think about it. None of you would think I meant that. I drew a soldier and wrote man below it. Does that mean all men in the world are soldiers? You wouldn't think that, right? You wouldn't misunderstand. Why? Because when we all came into this classroom, we all knew it's an English teaching class without anyone saying it. Everyone understood this without it being said. So when I put up those drawings, a soldier with a man below and a nurse with woman below, we all immediately understood what I was doing, and there wouldn't be the kind of question I just imagined. The term context in English perfectly captures this situation. The meaning of this English word, well, it's context. This word is quite interesting because it is formed by adding the prefix con to the word text. If we remove con, we get another word text. The concept of text is broad and not necessarily limited to written words. When I hung up the drawing of a PLA soldier and the drawing of a female nurse on the blackboard, and then taught everyone the words man and woman, this action itself is a text, right? It's a text, conveyed to everyone. Everyone understood the meaning of this text, right? Everyone understood. They understood the meaning of my action, so this action is a text. Everyone correctly understood the meaning of this text and wouldn't ask, are you saying that all men in the world are PLA soldiers? There wouldn't be such a misunderstanding. What's the reason? The reason is that we all entered a common context together, so a basic conclusion arises. The meaning of a text is not inherent in itself, it is only meaningful when it enters a context. This helps to clear up a certain naive idea, like thinking that Dream of the Red Chamber, dream, as a book of text. That we could all grasp the meaning behind dream, because the real meaning of this novel is right there, it's embedded within the text. We just have to read it, and we naturally get what it's all about, right? Understanding Dream requires a certain background, just like that Australian writer who, after reading it, was like, I don't get why people think this is such a great novel. It seems like it's mostly about eating. Every time Lady Jia announces it's time to eat, everyone gathers for a meal, and while eating, they chat and gossip about daily household stuff. Why is this considered a great novel? He thought it was weird. So, it's understandable why he was puzzled, right? Dream is understood by us Chinese readers, so we're all on the same page. It's all about our nation's history and culture, right? It's like our background, right? We're all part of it. That's why the meaning of this text can be understood. Therefore, there is a very important branch in philosophy, which has formed and is called hermeneutics. What does hermeneutics specifically discuss? It discusses the conditions that make understanding possible. We tend to think that we can understand things readily. Just give me the text, and I will understand it. Suppose there is a nation outside the world-famous mainstream. For example, if we play Beethoven's symphonies to the residents of an indigenous Indian tribe, can they grasp the meaning of this symphony? Can they understand it? Why can we Chinese people understand it? Our Chinese nation has always been part of the mainstream of world civilization, that's one aspect. And especially in recent times, there has been interaction, right? The interaction between China and the West. This interaction has allowed us to gain an understanding of the lives of Westerners. We have gradually come to understand many of their cultural achievements. We have even delved into their history. So, all of this has made a part of our Chinese context overlap with the European context. It is within this overlapping part that we can possibly comprehend Beethoven's music. Alright, let me use this thing to say something very important. For every text, and text is a broad concept, including when I perform an action and you see me doing it, I have already given you a text. You understand the meaning of this action because we are in the same context. A glance, a gesture, they are all forms of text being conveyed. So, we just naturally, in a way that goes without saying, communicate texts within a context that we never explicitly talk about, right? Continuous communication allows this kind of exchange to take place within the context itself, which we never mention, never bring up. However, there is a specific activity that does bring it up. There is a type of person who is specifically dedicated to bringing out the context that we have always been in but seldom realize, and that person is called an artist. So, in terms of context, here, when we ask, what does a work of art showcase? It showcases the existential field that we have always been in. So when we come into contact with the artwork, what is it doing? What does it give us? It's not a description of the existent. Of course, it describes the withered vines, old trees, and cawing crows, that poem, Fall Musings. Why did Ma Zhiyuan, 14th century CE, write this short poem? To let us see a few external things, right? Two kinds of plants, one kind of animal, and also a human landscape called a small bridge, flowing water, and a home, and there's that path, the ancient road. And there's a wind blowing, called the west wind, and that horse is quite thin. He showed us these things. What's so beautiful about these things? We can see them in our daily lives, right? But he organized them into a poem. Why organize them into a poem? Let's look at the last line, the setting sun in the west, the heartbroken person on the edge of the world. What does this short poem show? The living scene of a wanderer on the edge of the world. So, this work as a work is thus established. It's not to make us feel, oh, those two plants and one animal are so wonderful. In the beginning, three descriptive words were used. One is withered, one is old, and one is cawing, withered, old, cawing. It's precisely because these three descriptive words were used, they were combined, and an image group came about, called withered vines, old trees, and cawing crows. I call this group an image group. A small bridge, flowing water, and a home is another group, another image group. The ancient road, the west wind, the thin horse is yet another group, three groups, three image groups, and then they need to be brought together. This bringing together, bringing them together is the setting sun in the west, the heartbroken person on the edge of the world. Thus, a world is presented. Something has happened here, a transformation from the representation of objects to the representation of ideas. This transformation has occurred. It must occur, because if a poem is just a collection of descriptions of objects, then it is not a poem. Why do I say it is not a poem? Because it does not bring out the context, it does not present a certain world of existence. The term representation of ideas is my own creation. I don't know if the academic community would agree, but I have used it in my book on artistic philosophy. It is my own creation. Everyone knows another term called imagery, right? Aesthetic imagery. I call it representation of ideas. From the representation of objects to the representation of ideas, that is my own creation. But even though it is my own creation, it is still based on something. Where is the basis? In traditional Chinese aesthetic thought, there is a very important concept called Qiyun. I have written about 3 passages from Wang Wei, 18th century CE, a Qing dynasty scholar. In the first passage, he said there is a kind of painting that, at first glance, seems rough and disorderly, not following the rules. But upon closer inspection, it is full of spirit and charm, and its appeal is endless. This is the unlawful law. Here, a very important aspect of the artist's painting art has been pointed out, that is, how to achieve the transformation from what? The representation of objects to the representation of ideas. You can paint a fish, and Qi Baishi also paints a fish, right? Your fish looks very much like a fish, and when you look at Qi Baishi's fish, it looks like a living fish. But where is the difference? The withered vines, old trees, and cawing crows. Ma Zhiyuan wrote, withered vines, old trees, cawing crows, and that's where the spirit and charm come in. It is to allow the field of existence to be showcased, putting the existence of the scene in context. Otherwise, you are just saying there are vines, trees, and crows, right? 2 kinds of plants and 1 kind of animal. Do you see it? So, now we understand what artists are doing. Artists, for example, one type being poets. Poets pour their heart and soul into writing poetry. What does pouring heart and soul mean? It means every single word has to be carefully considered. They can't just write casually. So, what is the purpose of this careful consideration? We might mistakenly think it's for a more realistic portrayal of the external object. For example, there are many poems that glorify objects, right? For example, it's talked about in The Dream of the Red Chamber. They established a plum blossom poetry society. Lin Daiyu, Shui Baochai, Tan Chun, Bao Yu. What theme did they use for their first poetry competition, poetry contest? Plum blossoms. Alright, let's write about plum blossoms in the poem. Then the poems written will be judged. Hey, if you don't understand poetry, it's okay, you'll get it after reading a lot. Hey! You read the plum blossom written by Tan Chun, is it vividly portrayed? Exactly. Hey, at first glance, oh. I can't write like this, Tan Chun is amazing. Then you look at Baochai's. When Baochai's is presented, oh. It's a level higher than Tan Chun's. Then, you look at Daiyu's, it's incredibly another level higher. Finally, you realize what Tan Chun is just doing. Just praising the object. It's just about putting the plum blossom vividly into the poem, that's all. Baochai is more than this, she understands the object, right? Then when it comes to Daiyu, this understanding is taken to another level. So when a poet writes a poem, and describes an external object, it's not for vivid portrayal, realistic and lively, that's why they carefully consider it. No. It's because, how it is written, how it is phrased, can bring out that context, and present the field of existence. This is what all their efforts are for. In the novel, Xiangyun had a lesson, right? Lin Daiyu asked her to first read Wang Wei's poetry. Wang Wei's pentasyllabic poetry is the best, so she circled around 100 or 200 poems and asked her to read them thoroughly and memorize them. After some time, she asked Xiangyun, "Have you read all these poems?" Xiangyun replied, "Yes, I have." "What do you think?" Obviously, Lin Daiyu was her mentor. "Right. What do you think?" "Okay," Xiangyun spoke up and said, "In my opinion, there are indescribable beauty to poetry, beauty that cannot be expressed in words, but upon careful consideration, are all true, but cannot be put into words." Daiyu said, "That's interesting. Where did you get that from?" Xiangyun said, "For example, in Wang Wei's poem, there are these two lines, which we are very familiar with. The lone smoke column, the round setting sun on the river." She said, "When I first read it, I felt like this: how can smoke be straight? It doesn't make sense. The word straight doesn't make sense, and the sun is naturally round, too familiar. One word doesn't make sense, and one word is too familiar." Then Xiangyun thought, "Can I change these two words?" Later, she found out that she couldn't. When she put the two lines together, it put her in context. The words couldn't be changed. It's like having a huge olive in your mouth. What does it mean to have a big olive in your mouth? It means it's endlessly enjoyable. Those two words couldn't be changed. Can any of you try to change them? You can't change the words. Okay, I've told you a story, the painstaking deliberation of a poet, right? The idiom, painstaking deliberation, is like that. Is it just a push on the door? Or is it just a knock on the door, right? Why is knocking better than pushing? All for what? The presentation of the field of existence. So, artistic works are meant to present the world of existence to us, as long as it can be considered an artistic work. Regardless of its scale, whether it's a short poem or not, as long as it is a truly artistic poem.